Welcome to the Drum Shuffle, a podcast offering insights, perspectives, and conversations for drummers. I'm your host, Jamie Eads. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Drum Shuffle. This is episode 17. Jamie Eads joining you as always. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. None of this is possible without any of you. We've got a great show for you today. We're going to get to some listener questions, and we will be joined by Mike Pride. Mike is a drummer that you should know. Mike plays in several different bands, from Bacteria to Boys. He has a collaboration with other drummers called Drummer's Corpse, which is just really cool. He also has a piano trio up in New York City called I Hate Work. This is a guy that you should know, and we'll get to Mike here in just a second, along with some listener questions, so please stay tuned. Los Cabos drumsticks may be the best kept secret from drummers today. Los Cabos drumsticks makes the finest tools to touch a drummer's hands in the business. The best news, almost every popular stick size is available in both white hickory and red hickory. If you don't know what red hickory is, it's made from the heartwood of the hickory tree, unlike regular white hickory, which is made from sapwood. Red hickory drumsticks will hold up to even the hardest hitting drummers. Their durability comes from the density of the wood, but they do not sacrifice the feel. Please visit LosCabosDrumsticks.com to learn more about their products. And don't forget to ask at your favorite retailer for Los Cabos drumsticks. All right, everybody, as promised, we're going to get to some listener questions here. I typically don't bore you guys too much with stuff about me, and we talk to our fantastic guests, and today will be no exception to that. But I did get a few questions this week that I thought it might be good to answer. So Scott from Oklahoma actually emailed in, and he wanted to know about the Drum Shuffle's bumper music. So our intro, instrumental, and our outro music. And that actually comes from a band that I spent a lot of years in, a band called Funnel, based out of Georgetown, Kentucky. And that track is actually, it's called Inner Fire. It was on our record that we put out in 1998 called Wide Open. And it is actually the intro to that song, and then the outro to our show is the guitar solo section in that song. And you'll be hearing a little bit more about Funnel, even though, those guys are my best friends. Kevin, Phil, Alan, Matt, they are my best friends. They're brothers to me. So a shout out to them today. But there is some talk of maybe remixing and remastering that record for the 20th anniversary, which is this year. So I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I certainly hope it does. But I'll keep you all posted on that. But our bumper music, so Scott, if you're listening today, that bumper music does come from one of my bands from 20 years ago. And, part of the reason that I use that, first of all, I'm really proud of that record, and it was, really cool time in my life with those guys. But to license other artists' music for use in a podcast is very, very expensive. So we decided to use something that I owned at least part of the rights to. So that's the reason we use that. Our next question comes from Alex down in Tennessee, our neighboring state to the Drum Shuffle. And Alex asked what I thought was a really funny question. He said, sometimes when you're talking in your intros and outros, etc., it sounds like I hear a tambourine in the background. So are you The question was, are you sitting around your percussion setup when you record the show? And the answer is no. What you're actually hearing, and I think it's kind of cool, you are hearing the collars of my dogs or cats. So sometimes when I'm sitting here doing the intros and outros for the show, or even during the interviews, the dogs or the cats will decide to go take a peek out the back door or the front door, and you can actually hear the metal tags on their collars jingling. So no, it's not me, kicking a tambourine or playing a tambourine while I'm doing the show. You're hearing the pets because I do the show from my home office here at the house. So, the animals don't always cooperate with my recording schedule. They rule the house, so to speak. So that's the answer to Alex's question from down in Tennessee. And our final question comes from Dave, and Dave is in Oregon. So thanks for writing in, Dave. We appreciate it. Dave wanted to know the timing of the show. He wanted to know how quickly the interviews go out after they're done. And to answer Dave's question is it's kind of convoluted, but some weeks I will do 2 or 3 interviews with our guests, and then they can't go all out at the same time. We're a weekly show. Some weeks I do no interviews. So what we do is we will record the interview, and then before that interview becomes an episode, I will do an intro or an outro either on Thursday or Friday. Right before the show goes live on Saturday at noon, as always. So that's kind of how the timing works. And, sometimes we reach out to a drummer and they get right back to us. Sometimes we reach out to a drummer and it takes a couple of weeks to hear back from the representatives. So it's really catch as catch can. And, please keep your emails coming. We love to answer your questions and suggestions for show guests. We love getting those. But just suffice it to say, if I could get Peter Criss on the show, I certainly would. If I could get, Neil Peart on the show, I certainly would. We have reached out to just tons and tons of drummers, and they have tours that they're on. They have books that they're promoting. Some of them don't do press. Just know that we are working really hard to bring guys and girls to you that you want to hear from. And we do have some great guests booked coming up, over the next couple of months. We have interviews booked with great drummers that you're going to want to hear from. So as always, keep your emails coming. It's thedrumshufflepodcast@gmail.com. Our web address is thedrumshuffle.com, and my web site is jamieeads.com. So keep all your questions and suggestions coming. We love hearing from it. So today's guest, I'm going to do a quick intro for Mike Pride. Mike is just such a super cool guy, and I think Mike would agree with me. He's a drummer that's down in the trenches, that's working really hard, and this is somebody that I think everybody should know. Mike grew up in Maine, and since 2000 he's been in New York City playing in a variety of bands, primarily in the jazz genre. And it just has a lot of cool projects, and he's a great teacher as well. And he has a full stable of students up there in the city that he works with on a weekly basis. So we're going to talk all about all of his different projects today. And again, just such a cool guy. Check him out on his website. It's mikepride.com. So without further ado, let's welcome Mike Pride to the Drum Shuffle. Hey, Mike, how's it going today?
I'm doing good, Jamie. How are you?
Man, I'm doing just fine. Hey, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate you coming on the Drum Shuffle and visiting with us for a little bit this evening.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Mike, what we like to do with all of our guests is really just go back to the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about your background and where you grew up and how you got into drumming.
Well, I grew up in southern Maine, and most of the people, with the exception of my father, I had 3 brothers who were all musical, and my mother was musical. And my oldest brother is a whole generation older than me, and he's a professional musician. So I was always raised around music, and played. My brother played in church services and things like that, and so I started studying guitar with my brother when I was about 4, and switched to, I believe, trombone in 4th grade, I guess. And then I wanted to switch to saxophone in 6th grade, and I wasn't allowed to because there was too many saxophone players. So I picked drums because my good friend was in the drum section, and took to it pretty immediately, and was always into it, and saved up some money to get a drum kit, and was kind of always active right from the beginning, and had some sense of functioning in a band because I played music since I was so young, and had an older brother who led a band, and so it always just seemed like a normal way to a normal vocation to choose, even at a young age. And not until I was a teenager that I realized what a seemingly asinine vocation I chose, but I stuck with it. It's all been good.
Isn't that the truth? The old joke, it's if you want to get rich, don't be a drummer, right? I mean, it's,
totally.
Yeah. So, well, growing up in Maine, it's beautiful country up there, but I'm assuming, and I don't know what the music scene is like in Maine, but I know that you're in New York City now and you're staying really, really busy. Did you go to college for music, or did you just kind of at some point decide, hey, if I really want to work as a drummer, I'm going to have to get down to the city? Walk us through that transition for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, as a teenager, I knew at that point that I was going to be a musician. And I already was making a living as a drummer in Maine. A little family nepotism goes a long way. So anytime my older brother, who was maybe at the time in his late 30s, needed a sub for his drummer for his wedding band or bar band or whatever, I guess because he was my older brother, I was able to do those gigs, and I just went with him. And that was probably from 14 or 15 on. I had fairly consistent weekend wedding gigs, and played in church on Sundays. That didn't pay anything, but I did it just to do it. And then I did study music seriously all through high school, and had a great drum teacher. And I used to sub for him on theatrical productions he was doing that he would sub out to his students. Excuse me. And then I went to college at the University of Southern Maine. Initially, for whatever reason, I thought I wanted to be a film major. And I did that for a semester or a year with a minor in jazz performance. And then I decided to major in composition and keep my minor in jazz and stop going to film school. I did that for another year or so, and then I moved to New York and studied at the New School, which has a program called the Jazz and Contemporary Music Program. And I went there for a little while. But really, I went to New York not necessarily to be able to work more in the way I was in Maine. I mean, in Maine, I think I never would have been able to get much of anything going as a creative artist and as a creator of stuff. But I could have done very well to just stay in Maine and keep playing in a wedding band, or I don't think there's much session work around there, but I could have picked up little things here and there. But really, my interest has always kind of been more experimental music and avant-garde music, and definitely jazz music. So even as a high school kid, I always kind of knew that when I could, I would move to New York. When I was around 20, I had decided I really wanted to study with a guy named Milford Graves, who is a drummer who lives in Queens, who was one of the original, what they were called like free jazz drummers, but like avant-garde jazz drummers. He played at John Coltrane's funeral, and played with a guy named Albert Eiler, who's a very important avant-garde jazz saxophone player. And I loved his music, and I knew he was in Queens, and so I just kind of went there, and with the goal of studying with him. Didn't know how to find him, so I studied at the New School for a year. And then I met him at a concert and asked him if I could study with him, and he said that I could, but not through the New School. for whatever reason. So I actually dropped out of the new school and started studying with Milford Graves, and would go to his house most weekends for about a year and a half. So by then I'd been in New York 2.5 years, and was always working and was always writing music and creating bands off of whoever I heard playing or knew from school, and kind of was immediately working a lot, maybe anywhere from 5 to 6 nights consistently a week, back in the early 2000s when there were a lot of clubs in New York City. So it all just kind of seemed to make sense, and there was no massively scary move aside from just moving to New York and not really knowing anybody. And I knew that I was going to be out at concerts enough, and I was confident in what I wanted to do, and a lot of what I wanted to do was influenced by music I heard coming out of New York, so it just seemed to make sense.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I know that the jazz scene in New York is still, fantastic, and obviously, I think your playing lends itself a little bit more to the jazz side of things. Did you grow up into jazz? I mean, were your influences as a young musician, jazz guys, or and I'm asking it that way because I know you do some rock stuff as well, or did you just really like good drummers, on both sides of the coin?
Yeah, I definitely liked good drummers. And, I read Modern Drummer, so I was following, whoever you would follow from that, the Dave Weckels and the Steve Gadds and all that stuff. And, on the periphery, kind of following what those guys were doing. I always liked jazz music. I always liked 20th century classical music. I was also, at the same time, really into straight-edge hardcore and played in lots and lots of hardcore bands. And I did a lot of noise music where maybe I wasn't really playing drums much at all. I also sang in some bands. So I just was kind of into everything. And then, when I moved to New York, I thought I was a jazz drummer. Just kind of coming from Maine, maybe I didn't really have a good concept of what it actually meant to be a jazz musician. And so I thought I had a concept of swing and comping and how that works. And I think I faked well enough when I first moved to New York. But in hindsight, I definitely was a rock drummer. I was hugely into like Primus and Tim Alexander, and listened to Rush when I was a young teenager, and all the normal stuff I consider normal for a drummer growing up in the 80s and 90s to be listening to. And when I first initially got to New York, I wasn't doing anything that would be considered jazz by serious jazz musicians, but I was always improvising a lot. And then a great saxophone player, his name is Jonathan Moritz, who's now one of my best friends, needed a drummer last minute for a tour, and we had a mutual friend who worked at a place called Manny's Music, which was a music store in Midtown that I first worked at for a couple months. So he told him about me, that there was this drummer working in the drum department who seemed to have his stuff together, and he just kind of hired me blindly for his jazz quartet tour. I was completely musically unprepared for that and embarrassed. But I kind of got it together really quickly in the week of that tour. I worked really hard and had a lot of good input from great jazz musicians a little bit older than me. And by the time I got back, I kind of had a whole different concept of what it meant to be a jazz musician and started working on it really hard. And I think I had a good concept of that pretty quickly from that point forward. But I definitely, for a long time, sounded much more authentic in a rock situation than in a jazz situation. I just worked really hard to kind of change my relation to the beat and my touch. And that's really the only difference that I ended up finding that was consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I grew up in the rock and roll world, and if you ever see me playing jazz, you would immediately go, man, this guy's faking it, fake it to make it, right? I'm just, right. It's just not my thing. I love listening to it, and I love great jazz drummers. It's just not something that I do well. Right. But you brought up a really good point. You said when you joined that tour, you said I was, musically unprepared. And, sometimes those gigs that you're not fully prepared for are what really make you a whole lot better as a musician, because it's, it's, sink or swim at that point, I guess you would say. So you work in a lot of different situations now, and I want you to talk about some of the different projects that you have going. You're a really busy guy, which is, I think a testament to you, because to stay that busy in a place where there's so much competition is really impressive. But I've been checking out your stuff, from Bacteria to Boys, the greatly named Drummer's Corpse. I love that. That's cool. Just fantastic. I Hate Work, which is kind of more of a piano trio, I guess you would say. But tell us a little bit about the different projects that you're playing with, and how you form those, and just let our listeners know, and certainly tell us where we can pick up some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I've always liked. By the time I was an adult, I guess, I had gotten over any avant-garde snobbery, and I'm pretty much a fan of any music that resonates with me, which to me just means that probably that music was played with some sincerity, although I'm certainly not beyond being fooled. But so I think ideally at this point of my life, I think that jazz music, when it started, was reflecting an instrumental take on the musical times. And it got codified and has gone through a few seismic shifts, but basically it doesn't always reference current art and current music at this point. And that's fine. I play lots of traditional jazz and I love it. But for my own music, I'd rather represent my own interests, which go beyond jazz and include, anything from harsh noise music to modern classical music, and slow R&B slow jams, or bluegrass music, or anything. So I try to not hold myself back, but I also don't try to have one project that does everything. I used to play in a band called Dynamite Club that was a rock band, for lack of a better term, but we referenced all different styles of music really quickly, kind of scatologically. And I think my pace for giving out information has lengthened or slowed down, depending on how you look at it. So now if I was to do some type of pastiche, I would feel like I was maybe shortchanging all these things I want to reference. So I have different bands that reference different interests of mine. So I have I Hate Work, which is a piano trio, and sounds like a swinging straight-ahead piano trio, except the music is all my reimaginings of songs by this seminal hardcore band named Millions of Dead Cops that were around since the late 70s and came up with the Dead Kennedys and Black Flag and Bad Brains, and are their contemporaries. Their drummer came into some trouble, and I joined the band not knowing anything about them in my early 20s. It was a job for a couple of years. So I took all those songs I played more than 10 years ago and kind of reimagined them, instead of being super fast, speedy thrash songs, as being really medium to low tempo piano trio music, and imagining what that would be, and imagining what the singer would sing if he wasn't, singing like a punk singer, and imagining melodies.
That's
so I
really
wanted
cool.
to make beautiful music out of this abrasive, political, hardcore music.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so I'm working on that. There's no record of that that's available yet, but that record is made, and I'm in the process of, the least fun part of trying to sell it at this point, which at this point in time is a daunting scenario, but it's fine.
It is, and we could spend an hour on that subject alone. So,
right, exactly. But so I have that band, but prior to that, I have a band called, like you mentioned, From Bacteria to Boys, which I would consider a modern jazz quartet, and that band references kind of modern classical music and modal jazz, and also there's some slow jam R&B stuff going on in there as well. And Drummer's Corpse, is a piece for drummers. I kind of started it because, at least in New York, like you mentioned, the competition, when you're first finding your way in New York, I have found it to be true for me and a lot of the people who I can talk to about this. It gets really hard to not be competitive with other drummers and, feel jealous or just not treat them as people the way you do other instrumentalists, just because everybody's fighting over the same piece of cheese. So I wanted to get over that and felt silly that I still had some of those childish feelings, so I wanted to do a band with a bunch of drummers, and why not hire the drummers who I'm actually competing for gigs with.
Great point.
And it was great, and I got over that thing, and so that was the social reason for doing it. And then musically, it's a protest piece, and more of like an art installation piece, which if anybody looks up Mike Pride, Drummer's Corpse on any services they want, that album is widely distributed and easy to find, as are two of the three from Bacteria to Boys records, which are both on the record label Fidelity, which is a New York label, one of the last remaining real New York jazz labels. And then I have a bunch of duet projects where maybe are more improvisation based with different improvisers who I admire and like playing with. And then I play in many people's bands as well. For sure, I'm forgetting a whole bunch of things. I have a new trio that currently doesn't have a name. It's just called the Mike Pride 3, and we're doing our premiere New York performance this week. So there's always a bunch of things happening. I guess that band is more of, I don't know what that band is yet, but it's jazz music for sure. But what it's referencing, I haven't figured it out yet. It's still nebulous. But yeah, I try to have these little kind of monstrous bands that can kind of plug into a certain energy, and where I can explore the things that I'm interested in musically and give me a chance to, orchestrate around the drum kit in a more pointed way than you could as a sideman,
Absolutely. Well, and one of the things that immediately struck me is that you're doing most of the composition in all of these groups. And when you were talking about, growing up in Maine, you played a lot of different instruments. Clearly, our crowd is primarily drummers. And we talk a lot on this show about, how to take control of your career. Drummers have, for many, many years always been treated as kind of a sideman, in whatever situation. And we like to talk on this show a lot about, here's how you can take control of your career as a drummer and move on to that next level. Have you found, that if you control the composing, all the compositions, is that more fulfilling to you, or was it done just out of necessity? Or, talk to our audience a little bit about the reason why you do that. And I'm assuming playing the other instruments has certainly helped with that.
Yeah. I always tried to play a lot of different instruments, and I was fortunate that my mother was kind of like unable to avoid a good deal. So if she ever saw like some instrument for $30 or less at a yard sale, she would always buy it. So I had all kinds of instruments to mess around on in my basement, where my older brother was a professional working guitar player and had produced some albums of his own. By the time I was a little kid, really, I had a concept of what it meant to have a home studio. I was even doing like reel-to-reel recordings when I was really, really young, but I don't remember doing, but I have them, and they just sound like a little kid in a recording studio. I would mess around on these instruments and make up songs and not necessarily know what I was doing on these instruments. But it just always seemed normal to me. I like creating things. I like making pieces of music. I like putting pieces together and jiggering around with them, trying to make them sound better. And especially at the time, I had no sense of functional harmony, so it was a lot of experimenting to figure out things. But it just seemed totally normal. And even when I was in Maine, I had bands that wrote for like rock bands and sang in a rock band, but I wrote all the music. And so it was always just something I did. I also paint, and I used to consider myself some type of a writer and was trying to write a book for a long time. So that's just I've always been creative in that way. I don't know that it's more fulfilling. If I wasn't creating the things I create, I would certainly be a much less fulfilled person, and probably be a miserable person to be around. But there are certainly sideman gigs that I get great satisfaction from, and it doesn't come with any of the baggage that you have as a band leader, whether it be financial, organizationally, the hypercritical side of it. For years and years, I battled the feeling that I always played better in everybody else's bands except my own. And I think it's just because when you write the music and you lead the band, you really hear the whole thing in a different way, and you intimately know all that music. So every mistake you hear, whereas if you're a sideman and the bass player plays a wrong note in the bass line, you might not notice, and it might not cause that little hiccup in your expression, I don't know if it's more fulfilling, but I think in the long term maybe it is. But I would say actually when I do sideman work, it's more immediately fulfilling. Maybe not in the long term, but I just have to create my own thing and enjoy doing it so much on a different level.
Absolutely. Well, and I know that you teach as well. So for our folks up in the New York area that are listening, are you taking on new students constantly, or do you have kind of a core group of folks that you're teaching? Tell us a little bit about your work as an instructor.
Yeah, I mean, I've been teaching privately for a long time, especially when I was touring a lot. There was a music conservatory in Queens that I taught at, and then kind of ran an after-school program there, but they were friendly enough that I could skip out whenever I needed to tour. At a certain point, when I started realizing what I could be making if I was teaching on my own, I left that organization and started teaching privately. And then, if I'm teaching privately, I have to be more present. I can't be gone 9 months a year. But I do have a core. I probably have a core of a good 20 to 25 students every week that I see if they're, not on vacation or whatnot. And I have a waiting list for new students. The waiting list is only like 2 kids at the moment. So it changes. Generally, I end up getting openings, at the end of the school year, or, if somebody moves away. Not too many kids or adults quit, fortunately, but it does happen. And when they do, I immediately fill those slots in. And if anybody was interested in anything about that at all, they can find me on micropod.com and send me an email, and that goes to me. But yeah, I'm always looking for students, and I generally can work people into my schedule within a couple of weeks or a couple of months in worst case scenario.
Excellent. Well, so here's a good question. Now, I know a lot of drum instructors in my part of the world, which is, the Southeast or the Midwest, depending on where you think Kentucky falls into geography, right. I guess.
Right. But what do you think?
I say Southeast. Okay. It doesn't feel like Nebraska or Iowa to me. But
no, nor me.
Yeah, but what do I know, right? I'm just a drummer. Well,
well, you're there,
Yeah, exactly. But when I talk to instructors here, it seems like the younger guys that are coming in to take lessons, there's not many that are coming in saying, I'm a huge Max Roach fan, or I want to play like Elvin. So when you see the kids come in and they're wanting to take up drumming as a vocation or as their chosen instrument, are they coming in saying, I want to learn how to play Avenged Sevenfold, or, I guess you're a jazz guy, you're also a rock guy, but are you just teaching these kids to read and going from there and seeing what their musical tastes are? Or I'm just curious about the difference in geography. When kids come in, right. What are they looking to learn?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I'm not sure they know what they want to learn. I think they are, best case scenario, hoping to create a fulfilling relationship with some side of themselves. And, I teach the way I learned. I think I was educated very well by my drum teachers in college and in high school. And the stuff I worked on with Milford Graves is a whole different thing. But, I do the basic foundation stuff. And once that is together, you know, we do what all of us professional drummers do, and we keep working on it. And we refine it, and we work on our touch and our sound. And insofar as specific idioms of music or goals, that's completely up to them. I don't have a lot of younger people who take lessons who want to be a jazz drummer. Right? They definitely want to rock out. New York kids want to rock out. But their sense of what rocking out is, to me, is different than what my sense of rocking out was when I was a kid. So, like, for instance, I had one student who, every time we got to a place where he accomplished something, for this student, his reward would be, I'd say, you know, you can pick any song you want, and let's learn it and be able to play along with the song, you know. And every time this one kid would pick a song, it would always barely have any drums at all, and it would always just have like a 4 on the floor, maybe not even a backbeat. It would just be like, you know, a programmed bass drum on straight quarter notes, like every song. And I never really understood why he wanted to play the drums. So I would just like write out the program beat and then kind of like ask him to add different material. Like, what if we did this style of hi-hat pattern over it? It doesn't happen in the song, but we got to get something out of this. You know, I have a student right now who was kind of having some uninspired lessons for a couple weeks in a row, and then I found out he saw this movie, I think it's called The Greatest Showman or something like that. And it's got kind of a faux heavy metal theme from what I can tell. And so I just taught him, we worked on that theme song and playing that and interpreting that in some way, so he can start from the basic material of the song, and then we turn it into a drum solo so he can work on some technical things and move it around the kit. But, I mean, every single student is different. I have one little guy who's maybe 10 or 11 who, last time I saw him, he really wanted me to teach him about Roy Haynes, who was one of the greatest jazz drummers ever and still alive in his 90s. And that blew my mind, and so I think that kid is legitimately interested in jazz. I don't know if I knew who Roy Haynes was when I was 10 or 11.
So there's hope for the next generation, is what you're telling me.
if there's hope in jazz, yeah, I don't know if there is, but I mean, there's hope in expression for sure, whatever that ends up becoming. But yeah, there's some really interesting people, and you know, all my students and I are constantly working on their foundational material, and I really try to work on them as an artist, and that can go anywhere. I have some students who end up kind of foregoing the drums and get into writing their own music, and I'll help them with their guitar and their bass parts. And I have a student who went on to like produce some hip-hop albums that are quite great. And maybe I'm like a drumming and musical tour guide or something. And my purpose is to be there and nudge them in the right direction when they need it, and when they don't need it, let them explore and express themselves freely. And it's up to me to really do the hard work and the deep listening to try to figure out what's there that I can bring out in them, you know. And if they want to do it just really basic, then we can totally go through, you know, Alan Dawson style of jazz education, which is what I came up to.
Well, I think that's a fantastic approach to teaching the next generation of drummers. You know, let them do what they're going to do.
Totally.
You know, and I wish I had more of a, you know, as you said, a musical tour guide when I was coming up. You know, I think that would have been fantastic.
Right.
So one other thing that I definitely want to ask you about, I know that you played in a group, and I don't think you were leading the group, but you guys, and I'm probably going to get the name wrong, but it was Isidore. But you guys went on tour opening Amy Schumer shows. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've been doing that for a while. That band is called Locksmith Isidore.
Okay.
It's led by a bass clarinet player from Chicago whose name is Jason Stein. He is Amy Schumer's half-brother. They have the same mom.
Oh, okay.
So we have been a band and have done 3 records for different European jazz labels over the past decade. And she's a fan of jazz and avant-garde jazz music and music in general. She has really great ears and open ears. and she'd always expressed wanting to do something specifically with her brother and with jazz music. And since before she was who she has become as a celebrity, and he would mention that, and I would see her around, and we never really thought that would happen. And then especially when she became this huge icon, like, well, that's never going to happen now. And surprisingly, that is when it happened. And she asked if he would take that band on tour with her. So when she does her arena tours all around the world, she has us open up for her in this bass clarinet, upright bass, drums, avant-garde jazz trio in stadiums and stuff. So it's bizarre. We play for anywhere from 15 minutes to 35 minutes, depending on what she wants. And it's pretty amazing. It's pretty surreal. And I can't imagine there's ever been another avant-garde jazz band to do stadium tours like that. It's not like people are showing up wanting to hear the avant-garde jazz band. I think the first 6 months to a year after it started, the people were like, "What the hell is this?" And you could just tell it was weird. And then after a while, people started recognizing that the band's going to happen from social media stuff, and maybe they recognize some of us in the band, and then people kind of got into it. So it's bizarre and great, but I don't think that would happen if it wasn't for their relationship,
Yeah, well, I mean, there have been. It's usually the other way around, right? I mean, I've seen a lot of comedians open up for bands, to kind of get everybody in the mood, and and I'm sure for bands that are out on tour, it's a lot cheaper to have a stand-up comedian open your shows than another band, that has a crew and all that stuff. But when I read that and was checking some of that stuff out, I definitely wanted to ask about it, because that is kind of an odd arrangement. But like you said, she's iconic now, and that's definitely some good exposure. Was that, when you guys do that, is it do you see it as an opportunity to move, the record? I mean, is that the goal ultimately, and exposure, or is it just a cool gig to do?
Yeah, the goal is definitely not to move the records. We actually don't even put records out to sell at the arenas. I was always kind of petitioning for that. And I was like, man, there's like 20,000 people here. If we sell 1%, we'll be like the highest selling jazz trio ever.
Exactly.
And but we don't do that. That's not my decision. I don't know that it was even Amy's decision, but maybe more so the band leader, her brother's decision that, the focus is her, and out of respect, let's keep it as that. And if people are really interested in picking up material, all they got to do is remember the name and Google search it, and they can find the 3 albums out there, or come see other concerts of us where we're not, in arenas. So, yeah, it wasn't to sell records. I don't know if any of us had any false assumptions about exposure either, because we went in assuming that people were going to pay no attention to us. Fortunately, out of the 80 to 100 stadium shows we've done at this point, there are only 2 that I can think of where the audience was noticeably not paying attention to us. There was one where you could hear, the arena start talking, and all of a sudden there's 18,000 people murmuring over your set. That was crazy. But that only happened once. So I think myself, I look at it more as we're in this kind of great position to be kind of ambassadors to this more niche music, and it's really important that we represent it with class and with respect to the situation, and also not give them a watered-down version of avant-garde jazz and not play like stadium music. It's important that we go up there and that the sound quality is good and the performances are good and we look sharp, and so that we can turn some heads, not go up there and look like totally crazy weirdos and turn people off immediately. You're like, why not go up there and just be respectable looking people, and then we make some weird noise, but they have to sit there, and 20,000 people can't all go to the concession stand at the same time. So they're getting exposed to it. I would like to think that's helping the music in general, not us. If it helps us, that's great. I've gotten some I'm sure I've done some work that I would have gotten because of that. And certainly I have a relationship with a couple different drum companies that I wouldn't have gotten so easily if it wasn't for that. But I haven't seen an uptick in sales or anything like that. But I also have kind of learned to not ask. So it's definitely super fun. It's a great situation. Naturally, the financial compensation is fantastic. And the way her whole organization runs is really family-friendly. I have 2 kids and a wife, so like the tours are generally every week, Wednesday through Sunday or Monday. And then I'd always get to fly home for 2 days to be with my family in between the weeks. So it was a friendly situation and well worth doing whenever we can do it, really.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's, you know, I'm not hugely into the avant-garde jazz scene, but I'm guessing you guys are one of the few that's out there touring 20,000 seat arenas right now, which is just really...
Yeah, I think we're maybe the first and only ever, I think.
Well, if you remember, people were that way about prog rock, you know, in the early 70s. So, you know, you just never know what might happen. But, you know, I think it's great that that she has you guys out on the road doing those gigs, because it you know, like you said, it can't hurt anything. That's for sure.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, that band made a new record this past winter. We made it at Steve Albini's studio, which was cool, but it sounds great out in Chicago. And we'll see. The records that we have were done a decade ago. So we have a new record that comes out I think in May, and it's on a real label that has a real PR machine, and I'm sure they're going to push the Amy Schumer angle wisely to try to sell some units. So we'll see. Maybe it will help on the new record. I really don't know. I'm curious. I would love to think that it will sell way more than is expected, which wouldn't take much probably, but we'll see.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And, look, anytime one of my guests has a record that they're trying to sell, we're going to do everything we can to help with that, because, I mean, it's just, I don't want to get into a gripe session about the state of the industry, but it's hard. I mean, it's really hard. Even if you have a like you said, a real label and a PR machine, it's just it's very difficult right now.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough. And for guys like you that are out there in the trenches, playing the drums, and doing it for a living, kudos to you. I mean, we all want to be able to do that. And, for the fortunate few that get to, my hat's off for sure.
Yeah, well, you have to be a workaholic, and you need a lot of luck. I mean, before the Schumer tour, there were plenty of other things that weren't on that level, but all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, this work has come along, and this is really hooking me up for this period of time, and string them together. And then if you can have like some students who are happy to wait for you while you're gone, if you do it in a respectful way, it can work. It's just like a full-time job that never ends.
You're exactly right. Now, here recently we had Nate Morton from NBC's The Voice on the show. And, and he was talking about, when he got the call for The Voice, he was like, oh, cool, this is hopefully be 3 months work,
Right.
And he's been on the show for 7 years now. And, so it's just, we really do go from gig to gig and hope something works out for sure.
Totally. Do you know Guillermo Brown? Have you talked to him?
I have not.
Okay, he's the drummer on the James Corden show, but he was in the trenches of the New York avant-garde jazz scene for years, just like myself. And I have no idea how it happened. And he has a band called Thieves that's more pop-oriented, but he ended up getting the job as being the drummer for the James Corden show. But 10 years ago, he was doing, like ecstatic free jazz. So it's totally bizarre, but yeah, it's great. If you can get a gig like that, man, cash that check when you can get it. Same thing with the Schumer gig. It's like if it only lasts 3 months, that's great. And then that 3 months turned into a year, and that year turned into a year and a half, and just take it while you can get it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's it's just the story of a musician's life. The checks are great while you're out there, and you got to get as many of them as you can.
Right. You got to nurture everything.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Well, Mike, I really do appreciate the time and appreciate you coming on. We've really enjoyed hearing about your career and the things that are going on. One of the traditions that we have here on the Drum Shuffle is we ask all of our guests to share a piece of advice for drummers or other musicians. And, it can really touch on anything you want it to, but give us your one best piece of advice for our listeners.
And I think my best piece of advice is if you're really going to do it and commit your life to this, you're going to sacrifice so much to do so, but you can still have a good life. I have a happy family, and it's all great. But ultimately, there's a whole history of drumming and drummers, and there's thousands of drummers all around us all the time. And nobody's going to hire, my neighbor for doing their best Mike Pride impersonation. Somebody's going to hire my neighbor because whatever they present or whatever they offer is right for that situation or feels right for that situation. So I think it's important if people are really going to go into this, what do you really have to say as a musician, and what do you want to say? And it can, that's probably an ongoing process. There's plenty of things I wanted to say behind my instrument that I don't want to say now, and things I used to say that I don't say now that I wish I could, but I'm just not that person anymore. So you have to trust yourself and pay attention to yourself and realize that as far as I'm concerned, I'm only 38, but I think I understand that the key to longevity is presenting the best you. It's not up to me to go out there and be the next Tony Williams or Elvin Jones. If I want to work the rest of my life as myself, I have to present what is only mine to present. We each have our own individual things. There'll be no other musician out there that has the exact set of instincts as me, or I assume not. And the best thing I can do is trust myself and work hard to develop myself. And fundamentals you can always brush up on. I don't believe that some people can't be musicians. If they really want to, they can figure it out. But there's only one person who can be you. And I think that's the most important thing. Trust yourself, develop yourself, believe in yourself, and just keep pushing it around. I mean, if you have something to offer, that's why we're doing this. None of us, I don't know too many musicians that are completely delusional who devote their life to this and have nothing to say or contribute. I don't know anybody like that. So I think if we all trusted each other and trusted ourselves, maybe successful things would come to us a bit more easily.
You said it. I mean, from your lips, right? I mean, that's a really good advice and a great point. And, on this show, we've heard other guys say that, be the best you that you can be. And I have people say to me all the time, they say, oh, it must be so cool to play the drums. I just don't have the coordination, and my response invariably every time is, when you were born, you weren't coordinated enough to walk. When you started walking, you weren't coordinated enough to run. It's, you weren't coordinated enough to play golf until you picked up that first club. It's just, you bring up a really good point, and the fundamentals can be learned by anybody at any time. It's never too late to start playing. That's what I'm going to say. Yeah, for sure. Well, Mike, please keep us posted on the recordings as they come out. Keep us up to date on everything that's going on in your life. And we really do appreciate you taking the time. And if there's anything that we can do for you over here at the Drum Shuffle, don't hesitate to let us know.
No, that's awesome. Thank you, Jimmy.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I will talk to you very soon, sir.
All right. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. All right, guys and girls, that's going to do it for episode 17 of the Drum Shuffle. Many thanks again to Mike Pride for taking time out of his very busy schedule and joining us here on the show. Again, check him out at MikePride.com. Just such a cool guy, and we wish him well in all of his endeavors going forward. As always, hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you're using to listen in today. You're not going to want to miss some of the guests that we have coming up. I can't really confirm anything right now, but I will say this. If all goes well, one of my all-time favorite drummers will be our guest next week. So keep it tuned right here. You don't want to miss any of those episodes. As always, keep your emails coming, the drumshufflepodcast@gmail.com. Our web address is thedrumshuffle.com, and you can find more about me over at jamieeads.com. So until next time, may your heads stay strong and your sticks never break. Cheers, everybody.